Hello everyone, it's Mr. Boff here with your usual homework video, obviously for year 11. We're moving away from descriptions. My goodness, haven't we done rather a lot of descriptions recently? So we're going to shift over, as it does in the exam preparation booklet, from paper 1 question 5 to paper 2 question 5 and a transactional writing task. Now, what we're doing in this particular task is not just learning how to write a letter, as important indeed as that is. What we're doing is we're learning how to think like a strong writer, like a really able writer under exam conditions. So this task, the task in your curriculum book or in your exam preparation booklet, is all about control. That is controlling and organizing your ideas, controlling your structure, controlling your argument, controlling your sentences. And if we can plan carefully and properly, the writing part of the process becomes much easier and, in fact, much more successful and effective. So, what I want to do is, I was thinking about this particular task, and I want to start with this quotation from John Donne, very famous poem, and very famous poet, because what it does is this quotation from the poem gives us what I would call a conceptual anchor. In this quotation, the idea that no man is an island, it reminds us that human beings are not isolated little units. We are connected towards one another. We're connected with each other, both morally, socially, economically. When one person suffers, that suffering doesn't exist in a vacuum. And this is a really important idea because obviously the focus of this week's task is all about charity. And of course, we want to convey that idea that charity is about kindness, but it's not just about kindness. It's actually about our mutual shared interdependence and our responsibility towards other human beings. It's about recognizing that what happens to other people in society ultimately affects us all. And I think it's good to kind of come back to that conceptual anchor. Now, we're talking about conceptual anchors, and now what I want to do is give you three core pillars and three key words that underpin hold up our response. So these three words matter because they are going to move our writing from vague ideas like just sort of being nice to each other. Remember, empathy is about understanding and feeling the suffering of others. Altruism is about acting really selflessly without that desire for personal benefit and personal gain. And then philanthropy, which originally means just a love of humanity, philos meaning love, and anthrop meaning mankind or humankind. But today in 2026, philanthropy is about power and it's about scale. Who has the resources to help others, and how are they using them, or indeed not using them? And so using language like this strengthens our authority as a writer. An examiner is going to recognize that we sound authoritative when we write and use this kind of vocabulary, and it will make our argument sound mature, controlled, to come back to that word, and also really deliberate. Okay, now, students often ask, how did you come up with that idea, or how did you kind of formulate that particular idea? And the answer is, well, I didn't invent the idea. What I did is I looked at the question and I extracted ideas from the question. So the task is asking us to write to our local MP, and it's asking us to write about the importance of charity. And that word really, really matters. We're not explaining what charity is, we're arguing in our letter why it matters. And because the audience for this letter, the person reading the letter, is an MP, a member of Parliament, our political representative in Westminster, and all the way down in London, it's not just sort of casual opinion. It's got to be a really serious, socially engaged viewpoint that we're expressing as writers. Okay, so once we understand the words, we're going to turn them into questions. So when we understand the words of the question, we then turn them into questions ourselves. That is, questions like, what happens if charity disappears? It ceases to exist. What would happen then? Who should be responsible for helping others? Should it just be individuals? Are we talking about communities? What about the role of government, bearing in mind we're writing to an MP? And most importantly, perhaps, what kind of society do we create if everyone decides that other people's suffering is, oh, not my problem? These questions are where our arguments are going to emerge, or how our arguments are going to emerge. Okay, now step three, from those questions to the big ideas. This is the crucial leap. When you answer those questions, we're going to find that patterns start to emerge. If people stop caring, for example, society would become fragmented. Oh, wait, that's big idea one. If charity becomes the only safety net, though, support becomes unreliable. Wait, that's big idea two. Now, big ideas, therefore, are not sort of moments of kind of genius inspiration. They are patterns when we notice and are thinking carefully about the question. So we think carefully, we notice patterns. That's when we can start to formulate our big ideas and our core arguments. Okay, so the bridge from generating ideas to the planning grid. Now, this is why your plan looks the way it does. You begin by explaining why charity matters. Then we develop big idea one, followed by big idea two. And finally, of course, we end as writers by explaining what do we want to happen next? What do we want our local MP to do? Now, this is not an arbitrary structure. It's not just like a random structure we've made up. It's a really logical response to the task that you've been set by the exam board. Now, our introduction. Our introduction sets the tone. You're establishing that charity exists because inequality and suffering exist. You're making clear in your writing that helping others isn't just an individual choice, it's actually a shared social responsibility. We're kind of going back to our ideas, of course, from an inspector calls, in particular from year 9. And because you're writing to an MP, you're signalling from the very beginning and from the outset that political responsibility matters here. We're also, of course, thinking of year 10, drawing on lots of the ideas contained around charity within A Christmas Carol. Rather silly of me to have forgotten that. Okay, so we've got our introduction, setting the tone, establishing that charity exists because inequality and suffering exist in our society. It's not just an individual choice, though, charity. Okay, it's a sort of shared, it's an expression of our shared social responsibility and obligation to other human beings. Remember, no man or no person is an island. Now, anecdote. Now, this particular paragraph is about reminding the reader, so our local MP, that behind every statistic is a human being, something we can often lose sight of. Behind a statistic is a human being, a family, a person who's making very difficult, often impossible choices. Anecdotes take those abstract ideas, take those statistics, which can sometimes feel, they're just numbers, and it makes them concrete, it makes them human, it makes it meaningful. They stop the reader from distancing themselves emotionally from the problem that we are, as writers, describing. Then we get this moment of pause, this isolated single sentence paragraph. And this is, as I said, a moment of pause. You're forcing the reader, the local MP, to confront the moral nature of the issue directly. We're no longer just describing suffering, we're asking them, the reader, whether it should be tolerated. Can we put up with this? And this question acts as a sort of bridge between emotion and feeling and then laying out our big ideas and our core arguments. Now, you respond when we lay out the dystopia, as we term it. What would our society look like if charity stopped existing? We're responding directly to the question. We're describing what society would kind of turn into if compassion and charity just evaporated overnight. And that extended metaphor really helps. It produces an image, a really powerful image that helps the reader visualize such a society. And we can think of society as a tide, we can think of society as a web, thinking of that sense of interconnectedness, or something that's kind of cracked, broken, or damaged. And this paragraph is going to allow us as writers to show the reader the consequences of indifference, the consequences of turning away, thinking, no, not my problem. And of course, we're not just showing that there's the existence of need, we're showing, well, what would happen if we turned away from that need. Okay, big idea one. The big idea here is that we're going to challenge selfish individualism. Okay, the kind of individualism that Scrooge articulates in A Christmas Carol, the kind of individualism that selfish individualism that Burling articulates in An Inspector Calls. We're arguing, okay, we're going to take on that role of the inspector, if you will, that humans are interconnected, we're members of one body, to quote An Inspector Calls, and that responsibility doesn't just stop, doesn't just start and end at the self. I'm all right, to hell with other people. Charity is a moral duty rather than some sort of lifestyle choice. And this is where our argument is going to gain real ethical weight. Now, what do? We support that argument. We use statistics to show the scale of the problem, but of course, our job is to explain what those numbers mean. We're reminding the reader then that behind, and we're going to be quoting food bank figures, behind those figures are families, are children, individuals really struggling to get by and to survive. Evidence, though, is strengthening our credibility, and emotion strengthens our impact on the reader. This slide exists to make the issue local and real. When you mention Blackpool specifically, you remove the MP's ability to distance themselves from the problem. We're writing, obviously, to our local MP, our Blackpool MP. This isn't happening somewhere else. It's happening here in our community. And I've given you lots of sentence scaffolds, ideas, statistics that you can use there. And then in this section, okay, continuing big idea one, okay, you can see that in brackets, we're thinking of the solution. Okay, what's the solution? This is where our writing becomes purposeful. We're not just describing problems, we're proposing action. We're suggesting that by supporting local charities, securing funding, working with the council, these are realistic, concrete things, steps that can be taken to make something, positive happen, to affect positive change. We're showing that charity works best when it's supported by those in power, like our reader, which is our local MP. But now in big idea two, we're going to show maturity. We're going to acknowledge, of course, that charity is super important. But our argument could be that on its own, it can't solve structural, kind of broader social inequalities. This prevents our writing from becoming simplistic, and we show that long-term solutions require government involvement. Important, considering we're writing to our MP. Now this, with the expert voice, is where we add authority. We're going to quote an expert. Now, here I can give you kind of real useful quotations, but in the exam, you're going to have to construct them, essentially make them up. The point is that we're sort of practicing this technique in the exam, obviously for homework. What it does is it strengthens our argument. But we then follow it with an imperative, a command, a clear statement of what the MP must do. Authority plus direction, do this, it's really, really persuasive. Now, expert opinion. Remember, in the exam, you're not going to be able to Google anything. You're going to have no access to the kind of outside world. So the expert's not going to be real. What matters is plausibility. Does that kind of make sense? And explanation. You must always follow the quote, the expert quote, by explaining what it shows, demonstrates, illustrates about responsibility, charity, and government action. Finally, okay, conclusion. Finally, we return to our rhetorical question from earlier. We repeat it, and we're going to answer it with certainty. We need to show that a fairer society is not some impossible utopian dream, but is actually a distinct possibility, a realistic possibility, that we can make that utopia real. We can create a fairer society. It's possible, but only if compassion, only if charity, only if political responsibility, those three things work together. And of course, we end by reminding the MP that they are almost uniquely in a position to actually make that happen, to make all of your suggestions real, okay? So, quite a long video today, but hopefully a helpful video. You'll notice as I've been talking over the slides, I'm not just reading the slides out to you, okay? So throughout this video, you're more than welcome to go back, pause. I've given you sentence scaffolds for all of your different sentences. Okay, the only thing I've not given you, which you practiced in class, is the actual kind of like the layout of a formal letter. You can recall that from memory. What I've given you, though, is a kind of conceptual underpinnings, kind of what are we thinking about as writers? How do we go from reading the question to asking questions of the question? How do we then turn those questions into possible arguments? How can we prioritize and organize and structure those arguments to create a plan? And then how do we go from planning into the act of writing? So heavily scaffolded this week, hopefully a really useful video for you, but also actually well under 20 minutes. So for me, that's pretty brief. So I hope it's been really useful. Enjoy this task. It's an important task. Writing to RMP is maybe something that actually people should do a little bit more often. It's part of, it should be part of a kind of vibrant democracy where we can communicate with RMP. You know, we can hold them to account. We can demand things of them. That's their job. They're there to represent us. So yeah, really, really practical. Hopefully this has been useful, and I will see you on the next one.